Welcome to the WPAOG podcast. Today we're joined by Louis Gelinas, West Point class of 2011. After serving 8 years as an infantry officer around the world, from Afghanistan to Korea, Louis returned home to Detroit, Michigan, where he transitioned into the tech world. He sharpened his software development skills and co-founded Rivet, a workforce management platform that helps trade contractors better manage their teams with the support of AOG's shared interest group, West Point Entrepreneurs. As Director of Product, Louis now leads a team of engineers, designers, and product managers, building tools that reflect the leadership and organizational skills he honed in the Army. Please enjoy this episode with our host, Jamie Enos.
Louis, thanks so much for being on the WPAOG podcast today. It's great to have you. I'm so excited to talk to you and get right into this with your adventure here with Rivet.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's very exciting, but also extremely humbling. But, I'm really excited about the connection I've been able to make through the entrepreneurs group and wanted to share some of that good news story with everybody.
Yeah, that's exactly why we wanted you on this show today. And, you had such a success with that group, our shared interest group, the West Point Entrepreneurs. But before we even get into that, can you just share a little bit about your background and how it led you to West Point? How'd you get here as a cadet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, I grew up in Ann Arbor here in Southeast Michigan. My dad went to the University of Michigan on his GI Bill and never really left town. I'm back here close to family again. Always kind of knew I wanted to serve. He was also the first one to be college educated in our family. I figured I should probably try to check both boxes, and there's a special place for that unique opportunity called the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. My dad's a Marine, so he honestly was trying to push me towards Annapolis, but once I started looking into it, it was an easy decision. And so that's kind of what led me to West Point in 2007.
And then you're at West Point and you get through obviously very successfully. You go off, you do your post-graduation. What does that look like? What'd you do? How'd you commission?
I am very, very easily marketed to. So I remember getting to West Point. And even though my dad was a Marine, I wasn't really well educated on the military and its career paths. And I kind of assumed everybody was in the infantry. And I got to West Point, and there was like 17 other branches. And I was like, well, I kind of had a picture in my mind, and all the songs are about the Airborne Rangers. And, so I ended up sticking to that path, branched infantry. Was very lucky. There was some trickle down economics with a lot of extra Italy slots that year. And I pulled a slot to the 173rd. And that's where I ended up after, my year in purgatory at Fort Benning, working through infantry basic officer course and ranger school. I ended up with the 173rd and in Afghanistan and Italy.
Right. That's a big transition from West Point, down to Benning, doing all the courses and everything, and then getting out to Italy though. What a great adventure to be on when you're, 23, 24 years old and kind of exploring Europe on the Army's dime, right? And
Oh yeah. No kids yet either. Priorities in life, they shift over time, but at that time it was amazing.
Right. So you decide to transition out. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. No, I had a great run in the Army. I was very grateful for all the opportunities. I knew I wanted to be a company commander.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody had kind of told me that really the whole point of being a lieutenant is it's an apprenticeship to be a company commander. That's where you really get to start helping at scale. And then they make you responsible for all the people and all the stuff, got to sign your name on the line aspect of it. And I knew I always wanted to do that, so it's easy to commit. We'll do an 8-year run, 2 duty stations. My wife was on board, but really my second duty station was out of Fort Hood. And that's when we started having kids. And so that's honestly a big part of the story for me is just, I really, really enjoyed my time in the infantry, but, I understood that I wanted to be closer to home. And so a lot of it was how can I keep serving and contributing and kind of finding ways to make an impact outside of the military, because in a couple of ways I was able to see the writing on the wall. It wasn't going to work out for me and my family long term, but definitely enjoyed all the seasons the Army offers you, especially, when you get to stay in the tactical unit. I'm very fortunate. I managed to avoid minus a 1-year stint at the staff for almost my entire time on active duty, just PL, XO, mechanized infantry company, brigade headquarters company. Yeah. And so just really grateful for all those opportunities.
Right. And those come with, like you mentioned, not only the leadership experience, but the mentorship opportunities that you probably saw and the coaching abilities that you got from, leaders that you were under either at the 173rd or down at Fort Hood.
Oh yeah.
So, that's a great development program too that you probably experienced that you've now taken into your private life of running Rivet. So let's talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit. Can you describe what Rivet is? What are you doing over there?
Yeah, so Rivet is a construction workforce management software platform. We help people maintain their roster of skilled tradespeople, mostly electricians and commercial mechanical installers. We help people schedule both what are the requirements of jobs in terms of manpower in the future and who's going to fill those requirements, keep track of the qualifications so they know the right person for each job, and then automate all those things around communicating changes to the schedule, rotating people between job sites, updating your schedule with your job requirement changes. So it's just like a platform that kind of brings all those things together. A lot of times I feel like I'm making what I wish I had when I was a company commander, and like
Okay.
I'm bouncing around between the Army HR system and my Gantt schedule and my PowerPoint schedule and my it's kind of nice to make the one thing that solves all the problems.
So what was that inspiration then? Were you in construction? How did you get to solve this problem?
Oh, I'm very lucky. I'm riding some very strong coattails since I got out of the Army and headed over here to Detroit. So my co-founders are Ryan Meidel and Allison Akavidi. They had worked on technology development for wireless lighting controls for commercial and industrial installation. So they had all the commercial experience and the industry connections and the insight and the problem we needed to solve. When I had seen the writing on the wall and, I realized I'd be transitioning out, I trained as a software developer, like nights and weekends, especially on my last few deployments away from my family when I was tucked away in Poland for Atlantic Resolve or tucked
Okay,
away
wait, I
in
have to
Korea.
interrupt you. So we've got like history, Chinese, and now software development. Like this is your background? Like
History in Chinese, being an infantry officer,
right, okay, I forgot.
and
Okay,
then
okay.
software development.
Okay. I'm trying to keep up here. Sorry.
Yeah, and honestly, that's a big part of the story. Is like I said, I planned my transition for many years, and fortunately, I got out at year 8. So I had a lot of friends who had gotten out at year 5 that I could like talk about their transition to careers and industries outside of the Army. And I just fundamentally understood that I really wanted to start a business when I got out of the Army. I understood that from the beginning. Is like when I wanted to get out of the Army, I would try to like take all this risk appetite and things I had learned and this passion I had, and I can't direct it at an infantry battalion anymore. Like I'm going to want to direct it at something, something new, something entrepreneurial. But of course, like in the military, you just know a lot about the government and the military and military operations. So I decided that I should learn to develop the software because software businesses are the cheapest and the easiest businesses to start. And also like technical skills are like in low demand. In low supply and high demand. So my hypothesis was like, if I can become a software developer, I'll be able to find business partners with a lot of commercial know-how and industry experience. We'll be able to do something together. It was kind of like a 5-year plan. Like I thought I would get out and I would work as an engineer for like many years and find my co-founders here when I got back to Michigan. All told that I ended up finding Ryan, Allison, and Andy about 6 months after I got back to Michigan. And Andy's my CTO. So he had significantly more technical experience, but he and I were able to make the product, and Allison and Ryan were able to figure out what product we should make and why to like solve this problem they had deep experience with. And so that's kind of like the 4-person team we put together that got Rivet, this construction workforce management platform, going, starting in earnest in summer of 2020.
You talk about your inspiration for this and the problem that you're trying to solve and everything, but every entrepreneur has like this setback, right? And especially when you're starting out, right? I hear this story all the time about like and then and it's a cycle of failure, right? And even when it's like success, it's like but not really, right? Like everybody like, has this asterisk of disclaimer of like but not really. It's just like we're growing but we're not really successful yet kind of thing. And one of the really interesting things I think about your story is your story with the West Point entrepreneurs. So can you tell me about and our audience about how you got involved with them and your experience with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so the community all along has been like a great asset for me. Back then it was just, calling my old friends or jumping on LinkedIn and literally finding anybody with like West Point educational background, software engineer job title.
We
And
love
then,
hearing that. Our career services team is always
yeah.
going in and telling people like, "Hey, this is how you do this," and making those connections and searching. So great. I'm gonna plug them. Yes, this
Oh,
works. Listen.
absolutely. Yeah. And so, Joe Schaefer, Nathan Ramia, Sam Goodgame, these were folks who had kind of like gotten into technical work on the other side of their army career. And they were real kind of like mentors with to me and being confident and making
Mm,
that commitment to pursue my technical skills and technically contribute to a business and a product initially. But then, over time, we've got people on Rivet who are way better than I ever was or will be at software engineering now. And I kind of gravitated back towards this, people, process, priority management skill set with how we would roadmap our product development. And that's a lot of what I do today as the co-founder and director of product. And it was really interesting because we were always able to raise a little bit of money, but we kind of hit this like key inflection point where, it's, the classic startup story is like, we'll run out of money in 90 days. We got to figure out what we're going to do. We had some revenue, we had some paying customers, but we hadn't really hit, what they want to see is like the hockey stick of like growth inflection yet. And I ended up going out to the fall 2022 entrepreneur summit that they had
mhm.
out in DC. And, folks like Scout Ventures and the Squadra folks who run that, Sam Ellis, he was able to get me on the agenda to like give the pitch for Rivet. And it was actually like somebody in the audience there. There was something about the pitch that like compelled them to think we could afford their like executive recruiting services because they were like an executive recruiter and they were there being like, who needs help hiring like a chief revenue officer? And so his name was John Wilson. And he actually reached out to me after. He's like, hey, this is what I do. Rivet's really cool. I think it can help. And I was like, John, I don't know if we can afford what you do, but I would love if you talk to me and Allison and Ryan, to see if maybe you can just like educate us a little bit on like how we can figure out some of these problems with, scaling our commercial function and growing the team. And he ended up introducing us to the people who invested in our seed round, from his network. And those folks was like kind of like, the Christmas miracle. I was at this thing in October, and by December, these folks that we had met through John, he introduced us to his friend John Golub, and then Neil Sequira, who sits on our board and led that round of our investment, had decided that they wanted to invest in Rivet and kind of really helped us make it out of that trough of sorrow. I think no matter what, you're going to make it out of the trough of sorrow no matter what. But that was a very, very good time and good way to make it out of that specific trough of sorrow. And it just so happened that was the quarter we found product market fit. And when you look at our growth over the course of 2023, it was like, that hockey stick everybody was looking for, where we went from, at the time we had like less than 200,000 in revenue when we were given this pitch to being well over $1 million by the end of 2023.
It's amazing. What a growth, and what an opportunity to bring all those grads together to kind of help you and get this moving in the right direction. And I'm so glad that we were able to do that. Our engineering or West Point Entrepreneur Summit this year is September 15th and 16th, 2025. In September, you can find all the information at WPAOG on the events tab. You'll see career and networking, and then right underneath there, if you scroll down to the bottom, it's listed by date. So if you scroll down and you see September, you'll see the West Point Entrepreneur Summit there for anybody else that's interested in either attending, if you're bringing a product too, or if you're looking for venture capital investment opportunities as well. It's open. Great ideas being exchanged and networking opportunities. We hear great stories of everybody kind of just getting together and sharing ideas. Just another wonderful networking event that the team here at AOG puts on, and has awesome success stories. We love seeing our grads come back with their products, whether they're tangible or, software, ideas and those kind of things, and what's being put out there and the next greatest thing. And the fact that it's coming out of our West Point grads, it's always a little bit of a shiny star for us as well.
Oh yeah, honestly, it's amazing. And even if like you haven't maybe kicked off the entrepreneurial journey yet, and you're either looking for inspiration or like education, it was great when it was in DC because there's a lot of folks one way or another kind of end up settled down in that area, whether for their military career or their post-military career. So there's a lot of old friends to catch up with, but it's also like there's a lot of different businesses people are doing, and a lot of different, you were talking about Kyle Maggard and his product, and a lot of people who just have very, very clever, very profitable businesses. Our business is growing, but it's not profitable yet. So I love to go here and get inspiration from all these people who have figured out, how to crack the code on that piece of it. as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Kyle Maggard. We did a podcast with him as well over Easy. So you can find those on our podcast as
Yeah.
well if you want to listen in further about those entrepreneur objects too and how he got started in that. But so innovation, you've got to stay ahead of industry trends. You've obviously got competitors coming at you left and right. How do you analyze those things, and how do you stay ahead of those industry trends?
Yeah, I think ultimately, like everything just takes a huge, appetite for curiosity, even making it into the industry. I was on my bunk in Korea, like in between being the observer controller for a live fire, but it was like, what is on, the Y Combinator website about starting software businesses? What is on, you can get plugged into the right social media or newsletter feeds to like get that information. And really, somebody said something earlier, it's like way easier and faster to learn from other people's experiences and
Mm,
mistakes than your own. And obviously your own experiences are very powerful, but you only have time to have so many. So it's really important, I think, to stay, you know, budgeting that time to stay informed about what everybody else is trying. Like that's kind of like the number way to stay ahead of things. Especially when there's like a limited amount of time you can spend trying something new. And it's kind of nice being a small company with no customers and a dream and like 4 people who are working for peanuts because you can try a lot of new things really quickly until you figure out one that works. But once you have that one thing that works, you gotta really focus and invest in it, right? And
right.
a lot of your innovation is going to come from exposing yourself to different information, and you'll be able to run small experiments. But honestly, a lot of the work becomes growing the thing that's working. And so you got to keep your ear to the ground on what new things you should be trying. And of course, the conversation right now is especially about artificial intelligence and how can we actually commercialize products that add value to businesses. There's obviously like this incredible promise of what it does, and it's probably made everybody 20% more productive in their current job today. But the question is, what is it going to do that's either, going to be like net new value? And that's one of the biggest questions to be digging into right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. The AI is definitely going to, I mean, it already has changed, but it's just,
Yeah.
we're not even looking at it, what we know, right?
Right.
It's going to be so impactful. So West Point, right? We hear all the time about the leadership training and, the closeness of the classmates. And how do you feel your experience at West Point prepared you to handle this experience of being an entrepreneur? You've got risk and uncertainty and, trying, like you said, studying and taking on new skills and
Yeah.
under pressure and people management and, the pressure to perform and deliver. And it just compounded under, scrutiny of trying to be successful at the
Yeah.
same time. So how do you feel that West Point really sets you up for being in this industry of being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's really interesting because like it's so obvious how it does set you up to be really successful as an entrepreneur because of the risk appetite and the focus on leadership development and all these things, but also like the framework of being, an officer in the military, this very structured kind of like objective driven, almost infinite budget, to like this entrepreneurship thing where like everything about the environment is different, but somehow the skills are still like very transferable. And it's a great question. It's like one is having a lot of experience doing incredibly difficult and dangerous things kind of makes it very easy. If you only have to worry about the difficulty and not the danger, like everything else kind of feels like a little bit of a walk in the park, right? You did the difficult and the dangerous. You don't got to worry about training accidents. You don't got to worry about anybody shooting back at you. It's like, yeah, we can figure out how to solve this problem with like developing a new product or figuring out how to reach this part of the market. And those things are immensely stressful, especially because probably the only thing more important to a person than their life is their livelihood. And, once you have employees or once you have customers who are trusting some part of their business and their ability to provide the livelihood for their people on like what your software is going to do to serve them, like that's also like a very, very grave kind of responsibility. And
Sure.
I think that's the aspect of like just taking things very, very seriously goes a long way to being able to navigate those risky situations.
So you've had failures, right? I mean, what do you think is that number one thing that's been like in the back of your head here, like, don't forget this, right? And drive on, but don't forget this. This was the learning moment here, and this was the
Yeah.
pivot point of like, I'm not going to forget this, and that I got through the trenches on it on this
Yeah.
journey. How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think, and this is probably, if you read any book about, business formation, entrepreneur, it's the same lesson, which is just really unfortunate because this is one lesson we could have like avoided this
You're
setback.
just clichéing it all.
Yeah. But one of our biggest challenges early on was just kind of like we like allowed our focus to really like dilute. I said
Mhm.
Rivet is a construction workforce management platform. We serve these commercial and industrial tradespeople and managing their labor. Like we found out the hard way that if we wanted to be good at that, that needed to be the only thing we were trying to do. There was a while where we're like, well, what if we could manage your inventory too? What if we could be your asset utilization schedule too? Like, because obviously construction operations, just like military operations, people are a part of it, but there's like also the tools, the equipment, the information, and we leaned way too early into trying to cover more of those bases. Maybe on a long enough time scale, we come back and we, build by partner to integrate all those other resource management problems into like a cohesive thing. That would be great. But we really realized kind of like that same hard lesson everybody learns is that the most important thing is to know what the most important thing is and then spend all your time on that thing. Because that's the only way you're going to break through, especially in like today's world where like products are so good. And even, business facing products are getting increasingly like usable and sophisticated. Most people don't have to deal with clicking on the kind of stuff people in the Army have to click on still these days. Most people have gotten like a significant upgrade in the last 10 years. And if you want to be competitive in that environment, you have to be extremely, extremely focused, which is unfortunately probably the most obvious kind of like entrepreneurship business cliche I could say, but is also the hard lesson we had to learn the hard way going through our own experience.
Yeah, but I think you're probably right though, and I think that also comes from getting through that and like remembering that West Point experience, right? And going back to like, all the classes that you had to take, the athletics, the demands, the physical, the training, the sleep depriving, like everything being thrown at you. And it's like, okay, how do I prioritize this? What is important? What do I really need to know? Where's the fluff? Where do I, how to weed it out and be like, this is where I'm going. This is where I need to be versus
Yeah.
everything's coming at me. And I still need to do those things, but I really need to do this and I need to do this well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's in the end where when I think back, I spent a really, really long time on the active duty Army in my mind. Obviously, there's people
Sure.
who have been there for 20, 30 years or more, but it was a good decade even after West Point. And that company commander time is really where you get the heat of like the prioritization. Ideally your company commander and your battalion commander are the people who are being like, there's 10 priorities, but we're going to be able to really make time to be good at 3 of them. And as a platoon leader, ideally you get to like focus on the one thing we're going to be training on. This is going to be our key task. This is going to be our mission. But a big part of it is like somebody else decided to filter out the like 17 other things the various aspects of the Army is going to ask you to do. And that like intense focus on prioritization is like very important, even as a company commander, is that you can kind of figure out like if you picked the right thing to focus on, like not only do you succeed in your mission, but like everybody's okay with the fact that you put a C into, this aspect of the third thing on the list because you did the most important thing. And it's very fortunate also being an infantry. Usually the most important thing is like training your unit for the deployment or the training rotation. You kind of get to focus on the fun stuff. It is very challenging, trying to figure out some of the other things, of course, with like readiness and equipment maintenance and all that jazz. But what is the most important thing is always going to serve you well.
Yeah. So here at West Point, we do have a class in BSNL for entrepreneurs, but in general, any of these cadets that might, go off into their military careers and then decide to go into some sort of business for themselves, what kind of advice would you have for them now as cadets while they're here at West Point? What kind of skills or knowledge or connections? What do you feel like as a cadet, I should have done this at the beginning and then that would have kind of helped me later maybe?
Yeah, I think a lot of what like kind of like West Point has on offer is just from spending time with your peers and then being really focused on being like good at your job as a lieutenant, being a PL, being an XO, being a staff officer. because I've spent some time even like connecting with folks who would call up, who are thinking about an entrepreneurship journey. And, the only night and weekend time you have when you're at West Point or serving is like nights and weekends to keep on top of the stuff like your unit is expecting of you, and like the skills you need to develop to like succeed at that. And it's just kind of like take rest in peace that like those experiences will set you self up to give your undivided attention to being an entrepreneur, like when the time comes. And not only that, like the network, right, is like there's all these people who served and have departed from service, whether they're veterans or graduates, who are going to be able to kind of like school you up because they have that thing in common with you. And, honestly, there are people who gave money to our business. There were people who gave time to me, and they gave that time to me when I needed it, right? When I had already understood that I was on these non-combat deployments and I was developing these skills and I would be transitioning, so I would just say that is like, just have a lot of peace of mind that like, if this is something you want, like people will be there to help you and you'll be able to shift your focus when it comes. But, I think it's also very important to like stay extremely focused when you're at West Point with what the mission is, which is to get good at being in the Army, and then stay extremely focused, especially while you're a young officer, on the mission, which is to be really good at helping your soldiers and your units like accomplish their mission,
Yeah. It's like a culmination of all of it together to get you to the point. It's
Yeah.
those experiences.
And honestly, like the diversity of experience goes a long way, because like when you get out, you usually end up like competing with people who are a little bit younger than you and who are just starting their journey as well, but they just have their experience from business school, or they just have their experience from 2 or 3 years at a high growth business, or in one of these traditional kind of like feeder industries of finance or something like that. And those are your peers, and like usually where people are in their entrepreneurial journey. But at the same time, the experience you have from having served, having been a military officer, makes it very, very easy to like focus on the right things and catch up.
So what's next for Rivet? What have you got here, either short term or long term plan? Where do you see this, another 5 years or so?
Yeah, what's beautiful about kind of like Rivet and the business now is there's like a lot of like ups and downs, and it's been like 4 or 5 years, and you realize you just focus on the one thing you care about, and then maybe everybody cares about it too, and like you're growing really quickly, and then everybody cares about something else, and like nobody's paying attention to you. And the big thing now, especially being like 4 years into the journey, is just knowing you're going to be doing it for like 5 to 10 years, and kind of like everybody else's attention and ups and downs are going to come and go. But the most important thing is like for us to be focused on the trade contractor, right? So the trade contractor is really, it's kind of like this, we call it our like 3-tiered underdog story, where like we feel like, the trades in general and the trade contractor in particular doesn't have the same sophistication of tools a lot of other industries and businesses enjoy. They also face this incredible labor shortage, especially in the United States, of like people who are able to do this work, who are willing to do this work, much like the military. It creates this incredible focus on like, we need to get every possible result we can out of it. Because especially nowadays, like the reindustrialization from the trade stuff, the massive data center build outs, everything we want needs heating, cooling, wiring, structural integrity, all these things we need in America to accomplish our goals. And there's just so few people who are willing and able to do it these days. So it's just a question of like, what can we do for the trade contractor to make it easier for them to navigate that portfolio of jobs they're responsible for building up? And right now, like we're really focused on, we've always been about kind of like moving your people around the many jobs you have going at once. It's really like a resource planning, resource allocation experience. And now we really want to get into like really deeply analyzing one job and helping you make better decisions with automations and recommendations on how you should staff this job based on other jobs with similar characteristics, based on this information we can get out of your accounting system that shows the trends for this job. And so ultimately, a person's going to make a decision about how to spend a tradesperson's time. Like a robot is not going to tell people where to go and how to wire up a building. But the software can really help people prioritize the right information and the right insights when they're making that decision about how to like handle this precious resource of, skilled tradespeople.
Sure. So how can people find you?
I am on email, LOUIS @rivet.work. I'm on X.com, used to be Twitter. Just JL Gelinas, my first two initials. Love to talk to people. I'm on LinkedIn. Love when people reach out and to kind of, as much as I can, pay back forward all these things these folks along the way from the network have done for me.
Okay. And how can people find Rivet?
Rivet is, if you search for, workforce management or search for Rivet on Google, we are rivet.work though, WORK. So if you just go to rivet.work, there we are.
Awesome. Well, Louis, I'm so glad you came on today. I know that we have invited you out to some more West Point Entrepreneur road shows and events that we hope that you will join us as a speaker and a guest just to help pay it forward and connect with others, because you have just a success story that we're so proud of here at AOG that we want to continue to tell. And we appreciate your offer to also pay it forward to everybody else. I want to mention that too, that's a big part of it. And that just shows, the quality of a person that you are and how grateful we are for you as well to do that for us and for the Long Gray Line. So thanks for coming on today to share the story, to talk a little bit more about your experiences. And, we only wish you the best and we hope to see you out on the road shows. For sure. Thank you, Jamie. Shout out to Austin Hunt, the hero of the Entrepreneur Interest Group, always coordinating everything. Absolutely. He is one of our guys out there working those road shows and getting everything set up, our conference coordinator and support, getting our sponsorships all lined up and making sure all these run smoothly. So, yep, Austin, doing a great job out there, helping everybody connect and getting everything floating away.
Thank you for listening to the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.